and let them waste it all and just fire missiles at the Russians to no avail because the Russians have taken 20% of their land. The smart thing to do is to try and find some kind of peace. We spoke a lot about Keir Starmer
for an unconditional ceasefire. Let's talk about that just a little bit on the debate desk with Theo Washerwood and Peter Barnes. Great to have you both with us this morning, political commentators, both, and Peter's a political strategist as well. Tell us, Theo, how important Keir Starmer is.
And his coalition of the willing. It looks as though the coalition of the willing has now gone down the gurgler because Donald Trump's just gone, well, I don't know what you people are talking about. We're not doing that. You've even admitted that you can't do anything without America. So why don't you do something with America?
Prepared to put peacekeepers on the ground in Ukraine should it be deemed necessary, but of course they want that backstop, that security backstop from the United States. But in the wider picture of where we find ourselves right now, the Prime Minister's statement says it all. The ball is in Putin's court.
What if your car suddenly costs 10% more to sell to America? That's the reality British manufacturers could face if Trump's tariff plans come into effect. The economic fallout wouldn't just hit big corporations, it would cascade down to jobs, wages, and local businesses across the UK. Starmer hasn't even spoken to Trump since these tariff threats emerged. While he's busy reassuring everyone about our special relationship, British industries are bracing for impact. Is this what change looks like? A 0.6% GDP drop that could push our already struggling economy closer to recession? Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favour. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great, thank you so much. Now back to the video. Imagine waking up to find British cars sitting unsold in American ports because they're suddenly 10% more expensive than their US competitors. It sounds like a nightmare scenario, but it's rapidly becoming a potential reality under Starmer's watch. The automotive industry isn't just another export sector for Britain, it's a cornerstone of our manufacturing identity and economic stability. Jaguar, Land Rover, Mini and Bentley represent more than just luxury vehicles. They embody British craftsmanship.
Quite what that collection of beanbag politicians from Europe thought they would achieve by getting together on Sunday is beyond me.
They all fancy a trip to London, I suspect.
Yeah, quite possibly.
Yeah. Come to the table and negotiate with primarily Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. So yes, Keir Starmer is trying to cement his position amongst European leaders.
But anybody with any semblance of grey matter between their ears knows that this matter will only be resolved with some input from America.
Exactly.
But the real negotiations, the ones that really matter, are between Donald Trump, his team in the US administration, and of course Moscow and Putin's team representing Russian interests.
An engineering excellence that American consumers have historically been willing to pay premium prices for. These manufacturers ship thousands of vehicles annually across the Atlantic, supporting not just their direct employees, but entire ecosystems of suppliers, logistics firms, and service providers throughout the UK. What happens when a permanent 10% tariff hits these exports? The answer isn't pretty. In the hyper-competitive American market, where consumers can easily switch between comparable models, that 10% price increase might as well be a death sentence for British-made vehicles. Americans won't pay significantly more for a Jaguar when a similarly equipped American or tariff-exempt alternative sits right next to it on the dealership floor. The consequences would cascade through our economy with frightening speed. British-made vehicles would begin accumulating at American ports, unsold, unwanted, and serving as physical monuments to diplomatic failure. Manufacturers would be forced to make impossible choices, absorb the tariff costs and operate at a loss, raise prices and watch sales plummet, or slash production and begin layoffs. The impact reaches far beyond the assembly lines in places like Solihull and Oxford. The automotive industry supply chain stretches across the Midlands and north of England like an intricate web, connecting communities that have already suffered from decades of industrial decline. These regions, many of which voted for change when they supported Labour, now face the prospect of a much tougher era for British export if Starmer cannot secure tariff exemptions. Industry analysts project catastrophic job losses, potentially 25,000 positions vanishing within 12 months of permanent tariffs taking effect. These aren't just statistics, they represent families, mortgages, and communities built around manufacturing traditions.
Donald Trump.
And with America leading the way, frankly.
Yes.
Right.
So it's all wishful thinking, grandstanding,
and virtue signalling.
Of course, of which so many of those European politicians got PhDs.
I'm just going to echo what Theo said, that Starmer is positioning himself amongst European leaders, but in reality, what is he actually achieving? This coalition of the willing, it doesn't seem to be having a lot of willing people. You know, a lot of these nations...
Well, there's quite a few members of it.
There's a few members, but what are they actually going to contribute?
3 weeks ago, they'd never heard of a peace deal for Ukraine. Suddenly now they want one.
Yeah. Exactly.
3 weeks ago.
Let's rewind a couple of months before Donald Trump had taken office for the second time. Nobody was speaking in terms of peace.
No.
We don't know about peacekeeping troops or not.
We're all still very vague on the details, when everyone seems to be making the right noises, but with only France and ourselves willing to put boots on the ground, openly stating that, I mean, it's somewhat of a kick in the teeth for Starmer in terms of his actual ability to deliver on something.
That stretch back generations. The irony that many of these would be in Labour heartlands isn't lost on political observers. The automotive sector isn't suffering in isolation either. Our aerospace industry, another crown jewel of British manufacturing excellence, faces equally dire prospects. Companies like Rolls-Royce and BAE Systems have built their business models around deep integration with American defence contracts and commercial aviation markets. These aren't relationships that can be easily replaced or redirected to other countries. What makes this situation particularly dangerous is what economists describe as a double blow to British high-end manufacturing. Not only would tariffs make our products more expensive and less competitive in American markets, but US competitors would likely receive generous government subsidies specifically designed to capture market share from foreign producers like us. It's not just an uneven playing field, it's one deliberately tilted against British interests. While Starmer continues reassuring the public about the strength of the Anglo-American special relationship, economic forecasters paint a far bleaker picture. Their projections suggest these tariffs could trigger a GDP contraction of approximately 0.6%, a figure that might seem small until you realise it's enough to push Britain into a full-blown recession. This at a time when households are already struggling with the cost of living crisis and economic uncertainty. For communities like Wolverhampton, Coventry and Derby, the stakes couldn't be higher. These aren't just places where cars and aircraft components happen to be made. They're regions whose entire social and economic identities have been shaped by manufacturing.
No one, not a soul, not a politician,
not a sausage,
anywhere.
Bugger all, you might say.
Yeah. So Donald Trump has seized the initiative, has led.
Well, I will say he's played this pretty well from a kind of PR perspective, and I think he's looking like he's important, but let's be real, Donald Trump will just ignore him if necessary. It's somewhat of an irrelevancy.
Then so many people have got their knickers in a twist over 3 geezers having a fallout in a room.
Oh, yeah, because he's a bit rude.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Do me a favour.
To the grander scheme and the grander negotiations that are happening. I mean, one thing I do find very interesting is the rise of Saudi Arabia and how they have become the country to which these negotiations are happening.
When factories close or drastically reduce operations, the impact extends to local shops, schools, housing markets, and community institutions. Entire towns can enter downward spirals that prove nearly impossible to reverse. What makes this situation particularly frustrating is how avoidable it appears to many. Britain's competitors are actively negotiating exemptions and special arrangements to protect their industries from these same tariffs. Meanwhile, Starmer's government seems caught between diplomatic niceties and economic necessities, unable or unwilling to leverage whatever influence remains of that famous special relationship. The negotiations happening now, or not happening depending on who you ask, will determine whether thousands of skilled British workers remain employed or join the unemployment lines. They'll decide whether Britain maintains its position as a global manufacturing leader or watches helplessly as production shifts to countries with more favourable trade terms. The clock is ticking for Starmer's government as America's protectionist tide rises. Britain now faces a stark choice that could reshape our economic landscape for generations. This isn't merely about preserving abstract trade figures, it's about protecting the backbone of British manufacturing against devastating tariffs that would ripple through every household budget. While other nations actively secure exemptions through meaningful negotiation, our leadership appears paralysed by diplomatic niceties. The potential consequences are brutal. Without decisive action, we risk watching our manufacturing base crumble beneath unfair competition. Will Starmer recognise this urgency, or will history remember him as the Prime Minister who sacrificed British industry through sheer diplomatic negligence?